My name is Clara. I'm 34 years old, and the night my coworker tried to steal my project was the night I learned what it meant to take my power back. Emma was the kind of woman who could charm a snake. She walked through our office with her bright, wide smile, the golden child of management. Everyone loved her energy, her confidence, her buzzwords strung together like pearls. And me, I was the quiet one in the corner, the one who actually built the thing she was about to claim as her own. That project, codenamed Chimera, wasn't just another assignment, it was my masterpiece. An AI-driven logistics model that had the potential to completely change the way our company operated. My fingerprints were on every line of code, every predictive algorithm, every sleepless night I spent sketching frameworks until my hands were stained with whiteboard markers. I remember the way my heart raced at 3 in the morning when the script finally ran without an error. It wasn't just work. It was a piece of me. And Emma wanted it. I'll never forget the moment I overheard her. I was walking past my manager Mark's office balancing a flimsy paper cup of water when I heard her voice. Of course I was up all night finalizing the AI model, she said, with a sigh that dripped with false modesty. It was a beast, but I cracked it. My blood ran cold. Those weren't her words, they were mine, taken straight from the summary I had written only hours before. My findings, my breakthroughs, my late nights. And Mark, the man who had brushed off every attempt I made to explain the technical brilliance of Chimera, was eating it up. Incredible work, Emma, he said. The VP is going to be blown away. I stood there frozen, the cup trembling in my hand. For a split second, the urge to storm in and expose her nearly consumed me. But then what? It would be my word against hers. The office darling against the quiet analyst. HR would drag it out until I was exhausted, and Emma would smile her way out of it as always. I stared at my own reflection in the restroom mirror a few minutes later. My face was pale, my eyes wide. Fury throbbed in my chest, but underneath it was a terrifying clarity. They had left me no conventional path to justice, so I would have to create my own. That night I went home to my silent apartment and began to build my revenge. First, I saved my real polished presentation, all 32 flawless slides, to a silver USB drive. Every chart double-checked, every data point verified. Then I turned my attention to the company's shared server. That's where Emma would go. She was too lazy to build her own version. I opened the draft, sitting there one I had abandoned a week earlier. It looked plausible at a glance, but the data was incomplete. The charts labeled placeholder, the analyses leading to dead ends. It was bait, and I left it there untouched, waiting for her to find. My final move was my insurance. I attached the finished presentation to an email password protected and sent it to Ben, the only colleague who had ever truly seen me, just in case I wrote. The timestamp was my alibi, my proof that the work was mine. When the day of the presentation arrived, the boardroom was buzzing with nervous energy. Emma stood at the podium, glowing with confidence, her laptop plugged in, her smile wide. She gave me a pitying glance as though she'd already won. "Good morning, everyone," she began brightly. The first slides were fine, the title, the agenda, the executive summary she'd memorized from my notes. But then she clicked to the fifth slide. The chart on the screen was a mess. Placeholder data with a title that literally read, "Insert Q3 logistics data here." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She tried to cover it with more buzzwords, but the next slide was even worse, a blank box where the AI model's architecture should have been. The air in the room shifted. Murmurs quieted. Emma's smile cracked. Sweat glistened on her forehead as she stammered through concepts she didn't understand. Finally, the VP of Strategy, a woman named Ms. Albright, cut her off. "Excuse me, Ms. Davis," she said evenly. "The pre-read packet mentioned a functional Python model. This appears to be an early draft. And according to these notes," she glanced down at her papers, "a Clara Anderson was the lead analyst on this work. Perhaps she can shed some light." Every head turned to me. I rose slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Yes," I said, "I can." And as I walked to the podium, sliding the silver USB from my pocket, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not fear, not rage, but power. The weight of the room's attention pressed down on me like a spotlight. For years I had lived in the shadows, content to let my work speak for itself, even when others tried to steal the microphone. But now, as I plugged in my USB drive and watched my own slides bloom onto the screen, I realized silence had never protected me. It had only protected them. "Thank you, Ms. Albright," I said softly, though my voice carried with surprising strength. "What you've seen so far was an early draft. What you're about to see is the final Chimera model completed last week." Slide by slide, I began to tell the story I had written in Code and Analysis. I explained how the AI model wasn't just another forecasting tool. It could learn from irregularities, adapt in real time, and streamline logistics in ways that would save millions. I showed them clean charts, real-time demos, predictions backed by months of testing. For the first few minutes, my hands trembled. But then something shifted. The more I spoke, the more the anxiety melted into conviction. This was my work, my creation. No one knew it like I did, and for once I let that certainty fill my voice. The executives leaned forward. They weren't distracted anymore, weren't scrolling through their phones. They were listening, taking notes, asking sharp questions, questions Emma could never have answered, but that I had prepared for because this project had lived in my bones for months. Emma sat frozen at the end of the table. Her smile was gone, replaced with a pale, tight-lipped stare. She fiddled with her pen, avoided my eyes, but every so often I caught her glancing at the slides as if trying to will herself back into control. It was too late. When I finished, Ms. Albright closed her folder and tapped her pen thoughtfully against the table. "Outstanding," she said finally. "This is the kind of innovation we've been searching for." "Clara, why wasn't your name more prominent in the initial materials?" The question hung in the air like a blade. My manager, Mark, shifted uncomfortably. Emma opened her mouth, but no sound came. I took a breath. The old me would have deflected, softened the truth to spare feelings. But not anymore, because someone else claimed credit for work they didn't do, I said simply. And I let it go on too long. That ends today. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy with realization. The executives weren't fools. They knew what had just happened in this room. Miss Albright's gaze sharpened. She glanced at Emma, then back at me. "Thank you for clarifying. We'll be following up on this matter internally. But for now, excellent work. This presentation will move straight to the board." Applause broke out, polite at first, then genuine as the implications sank in. The sound washed over me like a tide. My cheeks burned not with shame, but with something dangerously close to pride. When the meeting adjourned, people approached me, one by one, executives, colleagues, even interns I'd barely spoken to. They shook my hand, asked about my process, congratulated me. For once, I wasn't invisible. Emma slipped out quietly, her shoulders hunched, her phone clutched like a lifeline. Later that afternoon, Mark called me into his office. His smile was strained, his tone overly casual. "Clara, great job today. Really stellar work. Listen, about the confusion with Emma, these things happen. Miscommunications crossed wires." I cut him off with a calm I didn't know I had. "This wasn't a miscommunication. She stole my work, and you enabled it." His jaw tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but my gaze didn't waver. Finally, he sighed. "I'll make sure credit is properly assigned moving forward." "See that you do," I replied, rising from the chair. My voice didn't shake, my legs didn't either. That night alone in my apartment, I replayed the day in my mind. The shock on Emma's face, the questions from the executives, the applause that still echoed faintly in my ears. For years I had believed revenge had to be loud, dramatic, fiery. But what I'd done wasn't fire, it was precision. I hadn't screamed or slandered. I had let the truth stand naked in the room, and it had been enough to burn her lies to ash. I sat by my window, the city lights flickering below, and whispered to myself, "You don't need to beg for power. You already have it. You just have to claim it." The week after the presentation felt like walking across black ice. Everything looked solid, but I could feel the slick uncertainty under every step. At 9 on Monday, an email from HR appeared in my inbox with the tone of fake neutrality I'd come to recognize. They wanted to clarify the roles and contributions related to Chimera. 15 minutes later, Emma swept into the bullpen with a bandage on her wrist and a story already loaded into her eyes. She never looked at me, but I watched the way she leaned close to people's chairs, voice hushed, palm pressed to her chest like a martyr. By lunch, the narrative had rippled outward. There had been a misunderstanding. She had stayed up nights to shepherd my raw ideas. and I had lost perspective because of stress. It was remarkable, really, how quickly a lie could braid itself into the office air. I didn't chase it. I didn't defend myself in whispers. Instead, I printed a timeline, commits drafts, email receipts, and slid it into a folder with a spine so stiff it could stand on its own. I scheduled time with HR and CC'd Ms. Albright. When the meeting began, Emma arrived with a smile and a latte, opening her notebook like a prop. She talked first, filling the room with warm fog. Words like collaboration, teamwork, mutual ownership floated up and clung to the ceiling. When it was my turn, I laid out the dates. The Git logs where my username flowed through every version. The pre-read packet that listed me as lead analyst until it was mysteriously replaced an hour before distribution. The silver USB which I placed on the table, not as a threat, but as an anchor. HR nodded, polite and inscrutable. Emma's pen tapped a staccato against the page. It would have ended in stalemate if not for the last page in my folder, the server access report from the morning of the presentation, showing a download of the decoy deck from a device registered to Emma at 6:12 a.m. A sliver of silence cut the room. Even HR's smile shifted an inch. After, in the lobby, Emma cornered me beside the elevators. Her voice was soft, contrite, even the kind of softness you offer a stray before the leash snaps tight. She suggested we reset, that we present ourselves as co-leads going forward for optics. The old me might have swallowed the bile and agreed. I met her gaze and felt the steadiness I'd earned. I told her the truth did not need her optics. That afternoon, Ben forwarded a message he'd received anonymously, screenshots of a Slack thread between Mark and Emma, gleaming with midnight flirtation and strategy. My name was in there like a bruise. Mark had promised to do what he could to elevate Emma's visibility, including streamlining attribution on Chimera. Suddenly, the fog I'd been walking through all year thinned. It wasn't just incompetence or bias, it was choreography. Once I saw the steps, I saw them everywhere. The weekly status where my bullet points were copied and pasted into Emma's update, my name sanded out like a flaw. The meeting invites I wasn't on, though decisions were made about my work. The mentorship coffee where Mark advised me to be more relationship forward while nudging budgets toward Emma's pet vendor, a boutique consultancy owned quietly by his college roommate's nephew. On paper, none of it was criminal. In the bloodstream of a company, it was still poison. Ms. Albright called me into her office midweek. No pleasantries. She asked crisp questions, the kind that made it clear she had already formed some conclusions. When I finished, she sat back and regarded the skyline for a long beat. Then she said the thing I didn't know I was starving to hear, that my work stood on its own, that what had happened was unacceptable, and that she was opening an internal review. She asked if I would be willing to provide everything: emails, drafts, access logs. I nodded. And then she asked one more question, quieter. Had anyone pressured me to store files only on shared drives, to send previews for feedback, to loop in Emma at the last minute? The memory landed with a click. In March, Mark had insisted on migrating Chimera's working folder to a shared space for transparency. A week later, file history showed midnight access from Emma's laptop. At the time, I'd told myself it meant she was learning. Now I saw the outline of a hand in the flower. Later that night, I opened my home laptop and stared at the blank subject line of a new email. Whistleblowing is such a dramatic word. The truth felt smaller and heavier than that. It lived in version histories and calendar timestamps in a pattern of tiny cuts that had bled me out slowly. I attached the evidence anyway. Before I hit send, I added one more file, a clip from a product council meeting 3 months earlier, where Emma presented a different team's pilot as if it were her own, slick, confident, untouchable. No one had challenged her then. We were all too polite. The next morning, the floor shifted. HR scheduled additional context conversations. Mark began avoiding eye contact, a man suddenly auditing his own history. 2 analysts from Ops pinged me privately, small messages that said more than they seemed to. "We saw what you did in the boardroom. We've seen this before." At lunch, the contractor who ran reports for Emma told me, cheeks flushed, that she had been ordered to give Emma early looks at other teams' work. She forwarded me the Slack directive. It was clear as a blueprint. By Thursday, Emma escalated. She requested access to Chimera's code repository to ensure continuity, adding our CTO to the thread like a spotlight. I replied with a tidy paragraph explaining that the repo already contained access logs and that new permissions could be granted after the review concluded. It was the calmest no I had ever written. She didn't reply to me. She went to Mark. He came to my desk, performative exasperation smeared across his face, and suggested I was being territorial. I asked if he would like to put that in writing. He didn't. That night, as rain threaded down my window, I opened the email from legal. The subject was nothing follow-up. The body was everything. They were broadening the scope. There were questions about conflicts of interest, about the vendor Emma had championed so aggressively, about a payment irregularity that looked to my untrained eye like a little seam rip in the fabric. Not a tear yet. A seam. I slept badly and dreamed of whiteboards of lines connecting names of the way a model surfaces, anomalies you didn't know to look for until they sit pulsing in front of you. In the morning, Ben knocked on my door with coffee and a look I couldn't read. He sat at my small table and said he'd heard a rumor so strange he hadn't believed it until he saw the email himself. Emma wasn't just favored. She was related third cousin to a board member who chaired the compensation committee, a fact no one had bothered to disclose. It explained the float she'd always enjoyed, the invisible hand at her back. I didn't feel vindication. I felt tired. Tired and clear. The story I thought I was living, a petty theft, a single attempted plagiarism, had been a symptom. The sickness ran under the floorboards. At noon, my calendar pinged with a meeting titled Chimera Next Steps. Attendees: Ms. Albright, Legal HR, Mark, Emma, me. I stared at the screen a long time, the cursor blinking in the RSVP field like a heartbeat. Then I clicked Accept. I closed my laptop and pressed my palms flat on the table, grounding myself. Whatever happened in that room would set the axis for what came next: my work, my name, my future inside this place or beyond it. I picked up the silver USB and slipped it into my pocket. It was never about the metal, it was about the spine, mine. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and nervous sweat, the kind of scent that clings to places where reputations are on the line. When I walked in, Emma was already there, sitting at the end of the table with her blazer pressed flat, hair, glossy smile carefully rehearsed. Mark leaned against the wall, arms folded, his eyes darting between his phone and the door. HR sat with laptops open like court stenographers, ready to record whatever story would survive this room. And at the head of the table was Ms. Albright, calm as a blade sheathed in silk. "Let's begin," she said simply, and the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Emma went first. She spoke with that same bright cadence, weaving a narrative about collaboration and misaligned communication. She admitted to using earlier materials, but painted it as an accident born of long nights and tight deadlines. She even laughed softly, a sound so out of place it made my skin prickle. "I think Clara and I both care so much about Chimera that wires got crossed," she concluded, tilting her head like a conciliatory dove. Mark jumped in, then backing her with phrases like team effort and big picture. He positioned himself as the reasonable middle, the bridge between two women passionate about their work. His words dripped with false balance, as if my bruised credit and stolen hours could be equated with her ambition. For a moment, I felt the old fear, the familiar script where I was cast as too rigid, too technical, too unwilling to play nice. But then Ms. Albright's gaze flicked to me. "Clara," she said, "let's hear your side." I slid the silver USB from my pocket, the weight of it grounding me, and plugged it into the port. My slides appeared clean and final, time-stamped and signed off weeks earlier. Then I placed a folder on the table and opened it, fanning out documents like cards in a hand I knew was unbeatable: commit logs, access reports, Slack screenshots, the vendor invoices traced to Emma's pet consultancy. "This isn't about wires crossing," I said evenly. "This is about deliberate misrepresentation. Chimera has my name on every line of code, every draft, every model. The only thing Emma added was her own signature on work she didn't create. And Mark not only allowed it, he facilitated it. The room tightened. Mark straightened his jaw, clenching. "That's a serious accusation," he said quickly. "It's not an accusation," I replied, sliding the server access log across to HR. "It's a record." The HR manager adjusted her glasses, scanning the sheet. Silence pressed in, broken only by the quiet click of her keyboard as she typed. Emma's mask cracked for the first time, a flash of panic quickly smothered by a thin smile. Ms. Albright leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Emma, did you access a draft file from the server the morning of the presentation?" Emma's lips parted, then closed. Yes, but only because—" "Thank you," Ms. Albright cut in smoothly, her tone final. She turned to Mark. "And these Slack messages, promising to streamline attribution. How do you explain this?" Color drained from his face. He started to speak, then stopped, the words tangled in his throat. The room didn't wait for him. The silence was enough. For the first time in years, I felt the axis shift, not slightly, but decisively. Ms. Albright gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Here's what will happen," she said, her voice calm but impenetrable. "This project will go forward under Clara's leadership, effective immediately. Emma, your conduct raises serious concerns we'll be addressing separately. Mark Legal will be contacting you regarding the conflict of interest with the vendor relationship." It was done, just like that. Emma's face went pale, her hands gripping the armrests as though she could anchor herself against the tide. Mark muttered something about misunderstandings, but no one echoed him. HR closed their laptops with quiet finality. When the meeting adjourned, I walked out first. My legs carried me steady down the hallway, though inside my chest, my heart was a drumline. In the glass reflection, I caught sight of myself, shoulders square, head high. I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city's neon veins pulse against the dark. The victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I thought about the younger version of me who had swallowed slights, who had let others drape themselves in her work, just to keep the peace. She would have never believed this moment possible. But here I was. And yet I knew this wasn't the end. Emma would lash out. Mark would scramble to protect himself. The company would move cautiously, weighing reputation against truth. The war was larger than a single presentation. It was about a culture that had rewarded theft, cloaked in charisma, while punishing quiet diligence. As I sipped my tea, a question circled in my mind now that I had cracked open the facade. Was I ready for what would spill out? The answer, whispered back by the city hum, was yes. Emma's downfall didn't come with an explosion, it came with silence. In the days after that meeting, her laugh, once loud and constant, vanished from the hallways. She stopped hovering by managers' doors, stopped dropping her buzzwords into every conversation. By the following week, her desk was cleared out, her name scrubbed from the email groups. Officially, HR called it a voluntary resignation. But I knew better. Emma had built her entire persona on smoke, and the truth had finally starved her fire. Mark lasted longer, clinging to the walls of the company like peeling paint. But the vendor scandal grew teeth. Legal unearthed payments routed through shadow accounts, and suddenly the same executives who had once praised his big-picture vision stopped meeting his eyes. By the end of the quarter, he too was gone. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought revenge would taste sweet like honey on the tongue. But when the news hit my inbox, all I felt was tired. Tired and relieved, as if I had been holding up a weight I didn't realize was mine to carry, and someone had finally lifted it away. The real victory wasn't their downfall, it was my own reclamation. I was named lead on Chimera, officially the recognition long overdue. But more than the title, what mattered was the change inside me. The woman who once whispered her ideas in the corner now spoke them aloud, unflinching. The woman who once let others smooth over her anger now let it sharpen into truth. Late one night, I sat alone in the office, the glow of the city seeping through the windows. Chimera's code ran across my screen, streams of numbers folding into predictions, a system alive because I had breathed life into it. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud not just of the project, but of myself. Proud that I had stood when it mattered, proud that I had refused to vanish. But pride came with grief too. Grief for the years I had lost, for the moments when I had let myself be erased. Grief for the girl who had thought silence was safer than truth. I promised her sitting there with the city at my back that I would never silence her again. Looking back, I realized this wasn't only about Emma or Mark. They were symptoms of something bigger, a culture that rewards charm over substance theft, over diligence, appearance over truth. And maybe I couldn't change the whole system, but I could refuse to play by its rules. I could choose to protect my work, my voice, my worth. And that choice was everything. If you've listened to my story this far, maybe some part of it feels like your own. Maybe you've been overlooked, erased, or betrayed by someone who smiled while they did it. Maybe you've been told to keep quiet, to be a team player, to let someone else shine with your light. And maybe you've wondered if speaking up is worth the risk. I can't promise you it will be easy. The truth rarely is. But I can promise you this silence won't save you. It only feeds the people who thrive in the dark. Speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes, is how you take yourself back. That's what I learned. That's what Chimera gave me, not just a project, but a mirror. It showed me I wasn't powerless. I was only waiting for the moment I believed in my own strength. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own battles, I'd love for you to share it. Like this video, subscribe for more stories of betrayal and survival, and leave a comment with your own experience. Maybe someone else out there needs to hear it. Because at the end of the day, betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after it. I used to think revenge was about watching someone fall. Now I know it's about watching yourself stand taller than you ever thought you could.